The stagecoach rattled to a halt in a cloud of dust as the sun dipped below the rugged mountains of Arizona Territory, casting long shadows across the lone figure that stepped down with visible effort. Tessa Davis clutched her swollen belly with one hand and a small carpetbag with the other, her pale face a mask of determination, despite the exhaustion etched into every line. Snowflake, Arizona wasn't much a dusty main street lined with wooden buildings, a saloon, general store, and a handful of homes, but to Tessa, it represented her last hope. The year was 1883, and the West was still wild enough that a woman traveling alone raised eyebrows, let alone one who was clearly with child and without a wedding band. The few townspeople visible on the boardwalk paused in their evening activities to stare openly at the newcomer, whispers already beginning to circulate. "Madam, you need some assistance," the stagecoach driver called down, concerned by her unsteady footing. "No, thank you." "I can manage," Tessa replied, her voice stronger than she felt. Her dark auburn hair was coming loose from its once neat bun, and her green traveling dress was wrinkled and stained from the 3-day journey. She had precisely $4.37 to her name, a letter of introduction to a woman who might not even live here anymore, and approximately 6 weeks before her baby would arrive. What she didn't have was options. "Hotel's just down the way," the driver added, pointing toward a 2-story building with peeling paint. "Though it ain't much." Tessa nodded her thanks and began making her way down the street, feeling the weight of stairs on her back. She'd grown accustomed to the judgment in the last few months. After William had abandoned her upon learning of the pregnancy, her own family had disowned her, leaving her with nowhere to turn but to her mother's old friend who had moved west years ago. Whether Martha Stevens still lived in Snowflake was a question that had haunted Tessa for the entirety of her journey from Boston. The hotel owner, a pinch-faced woman with suspicious eyes, demanded payment in advance. 3 nights was all Tessa could afford, which left precious little for food. The room was small and sparse, but clean enough, with a narrow bed and a basin for washing. Tessa sank onto the edge of the mattress, finally allowing herself to release the breath she'd been holding since stepping off the stagecoach. Her hand moved to her belly, where the baby kicked insistently. "Just us now, little one," she whispered. "But I'll find a way, I promise you that." Morning came with the sounds of a town awakening, horses neighing, wagons creaking, voices calling out. Tessa had slept poorly, her mind racing with plans and worries. She dressed carefully in her second dress, a blue cotton that had seen better days but at least was clean. After a sparse breakfast of bread and tea in the hotel's small dining room, she set out to find Martha Stevens. The general store seemed the best place to start. A bell jangled overhead as she entered, and Tessa found herself in a wonderland of goods, barrels of flour and sugar, shelves lined with canned goods, tools hanging from the ceiling, and a glass case displaying sundries too precious to be left unprotected. "Can I help you, miss?" The shopkeeper was a portly man with a magnificent mustache and kind eyes. "I hope so. I'm looking for Martha Stevens. She would have moved here perhaps 10 years ago from Boston." The man's expression fell. "Martha, I'm afraid you're about 3 years too late. Consumption took her winter of '80. Real shame, she was a fine woman." Tessa felt the floor tilt beneath her, her one tenuous connection, her only hope, gone. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. "You all right, miss? You've gone white as a sheet." "I'm fine," she managed, "just disappointed. She was a friend of my mother's." "You came all this way to see Martha?" He eyed her condition with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. "Yes, I had hoped." She let the sentence trail off, unsure how to explain her desperate situation without inviting more judgment. The shopkeeper seemed to understand anyway. "Name's Henry Wilson. My wife might be able to help you find a place to stay for a bit. She runs a boarding house, though it's mostly filled with minors at present." "That's very kind, but I'm afraid I don't have much money." Tessa straightened her shoulders. "What I really need is work." Henry scratched his chin. "Not many proper jobs for a lady in your condition, especially not in a town this size, though." He paused, considering. Jackson Steele might need help out at his ranch. His housekeeper left to care for her ailing sister about a month back. He's been managing on his own, but that place needs a woman's touch. "Jackson Steele," Tessa repeated, "owns the Double S Ranch about 3 miles out of town. Good man, fair employer from what I hear. Keeps to himself mostly since his wife passed, but he's respected around these parts." Henry reached beneath the counter for a scrap of paper and pencil. "I'll write you directions, if you're up for the walk, that is." Tessa took the paper gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I've come this far. I can certainly manage 3 more miles." The walk to the Double S Ranch took Tessa nearly 2 hours, her pace slowed by her condition and the need to rest frequently. The land surrounding Snowflake was beautiful in a stark, uncompromising way, expanses of scrubby grass, dotted with juniper and pine, all beneath a sky so vast and blue it made her feel insignificant. By the time the ranch house came into view, Tessa was exhausted and desperately thirsty. The Double S was larger than she'd expected, a substantial log house with a covered porch, several outbuildings, a corral filled with horses, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse off to the side. A windmill creaked lazily in the breeze, pumping water into a nearby trough. She paused at the gate, gathering her courage. This was her last hope, and she couldn't afford to seem desperate, even if that's exactly what she was. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn. A rider approached from the direction of the pastures, a tall man on a chestnut horse. He slowed as he neared, studying her with obvious curiosity. "Can I help you, madam?" His voice was deep and gravelly, as if unused to speaking. "I hope so," Tessa replied, lifting her chin. "I'm looking for Mr. Jackson Steele. You found him." He swung down from the saddle with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime on horseback. Up close, he was imposing, well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were a startling blue beneath the brim of his worn Stetson, and his dark beard was neatly trimmed, unlike those of many Western men she'd encountered. "My name is Tessa Davis. Mr. Wilson at the general store suggested I speak with you about employment." She forced herself to meet his gaze directly, refusing to show weakness. Jackson Steele's eyes flickered briefly to her midsection before returning to her face, his expression unreadable. "Employment. I understand you're in need of a housekeeper." "I'm an excellent cook. I keep a tidy home, and I'm not afraid of hard work." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her travel-worn appearance and her obvious condition. "Where's your husband, Mrs. Davis?" "There isn't one," Tessa admitted, seeing no point in lying. "And it's Miss Davis." His eyebrows rose slightly, but to his credit, no overt judgment crossed his features. "I see. And you came to Snowflake alone, in your condition." "I did." He seemed to consider this, absently stroking his horse's neck. "The work's hard, Miss Davis. House needs cleaning, cooking for me, and sometimes the hands when they're working cattle, laundry, garden tending. Not sure it's suitable for a woman in your situation." "Mr. Steele," Tessa said, drawing herself up to her full height, which still left her nearly a foot shorter than him. "I have traveled over 2,000 miles alone. I've endured judgment, discomfort, and no small amount of fear to reach this place. I am perfectly capable of managing household duties, and I need the work. If you prefer to turn me away because of moral objections to my circumstances, that is your prerogative, but please don't question my capability." For a moment, she thought she caught a glimmer of something like respect in his eyes. "Where were you planning on staying?" he asked. "I have a room at the hotel in town, but only for 2 more nights." Jackson Steele looked at the sky, then back at the ranch house as if seeking answers in the wind. Finally, he sighed. "There's a room off the kitchen. Nothing fancy, but it's clean. You can stay there if you take the job. I pay $15 a month plus room and board." Relief washed over Tessa so powerfully she nearly swayed on her feet. "When would you like me to start? You look about ready to drop right now," he observed. "Why don't you come inside, have some water, and rest a bit? We can discuss the particulars after." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly pleasant spacious, with solid, well-crafted furniture and large windows that allowed in plenty of light. It was clean enough, though clearly lacking a woman's touch in the small details. Jackson showed her to the kitchen, a large room with a massive wood-burning stove and a sturdy pine table at its center. He poured water from a pitcher into a glass and set it before her. "Drink slow," he advised. "Heat'll get to you quick out here, especially in your condition." Tessa sipped gratefully, looking around the kitchen with a critical eye. It was functional but needed organization. She could already see ways to improve the space. "How far along are you?" Jackson asked abruptly. "About 7 months, I believe," he nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And after?" "After?" Tessa repeated, confused. "After the baby comes. What's your plan?" The question caught her off guard. In truth, her plan had extended only as far as finding Martha and hopefully securing a place to stay until the birth. Beyond that was a terrifying void of uncertainty. "I'll continue working, of course, if you'll have me. The baby won't interfere with my duties." Jackson leaned against the counter, arms crossed over his chest. His blue eyes were penetrating, as if he could see right through her carefully constructed facade of confidence. "A baby changes everything, Miss Davis. I think you know that." Tessa set down her glass, frustration building. "Mr. Steele, if you're telling me the position won't be available after I give birth, I'd appreciate your honesty now." "That's not what I'm saying." He pushed away from the counter and paced the length of the kitchen. "This is a small town, Miss Davis. People talk. A woman alone with a child, no husband to speak of. Life won't be easy for either of you. Life hasn't been easy for some time now, Mr. Steele. I'm well aware of the challenges ahead." He stopped pacing and turned to face her directly. "I'm offering you a solution. Marry me." Tessa nearly choked on her water. "I beg your pardon. It's a practical arrangement. You need security for yourself and your child." "I need a housekeeper and could use a wife to help run this place. We'd have separate rooms, of course. I'm not expecting. That is, this would be a marriage in name only." She stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious. You don't even know me." "I know enough." "You're determined. You've got grit coming all this way alone, and you're clearly desperate enough to consider my offer." His voice softened slightly. "The baby will have my name. No one in town would need to know it's not mine. You'd both be protected." Tessa felt as if she'd stepped into some bizarre dream. "Mr. Steele, while I appreciate your unconventional offer, I cannot possibly accept. Marriage is what people make of it," he interrupted. "I had love once. I'm not looking to replace my wife. What I'm offering is security, respect, and a home for you and your child." "Why would you do this? What do you gain?" He ran a hand through his dark hair, looking suddenly weary. "I told you I need help running this place, and maybe I've been alone too long." He paused. "Think about it. You don't need to decide right now." Take the housekeeper position, see if you can tolerate living out here, and let me know before that baby comes." It was madness, complete madness. And yet, as Tessa lay in the small but comfortable room off the kitchen that night, her hand resting on her swollen belly, she couldn't help but consider Jackson Steele's proposal. What future could she realistically provide for her child alone? Even if she managed to keep the housekeeper position after giving birth, her wages would barely cover necessities. And Jackson was right about one thing: life in a small town for an unmarried mother would be unrelentingly harsh. But marriage to a virtual stranger, a man who had made it clear he had no romantic interest in her, it felt like trading one form of desperation for another. The baby kicked vigorously, as if protesting her uncertainty. "What should we do, little one?" she whispered into the darkness. For now, she decided, she would focus on proving herself valuable as a housekeeper. The rest could wait. The following days fell into a rhythm. Tessa rose early to prepare breakfast for Jackson, and occasionally for the two ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse, brothers named Caleb and Micah Walsh. She spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the house, which had clearly suffered from male neglect. The afternoons were devoted to laundry, bread baking, and tending the small kitchen garden that had gone somewhat wild in the absence of care. Jackson himself was often gone from sunup to sundown, returning dusty and tired from whatever ranch work occupied his days. He was unfailingly polite, but maintained a careful distance, speaking little during meals and retreating to his study in the evenings. The promised discussion of his marriage proposal didn't arise again, for which Tessa was grateful. She needed time to consider all angles of such a life-altering decision. On her third day at the Double S, Tessa was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the sound of approaching horses. A moment later, Jackson rode into view alongside a woman on a gray mare. The woman was perhaps in her 50s, handsome rather than pretty, with silver threading through her dark hair and a no-nonsense set to her mouth. "Miss Davis," Jackson called as he dismounted, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Alina Reed." Tessa's surprise must have shown on her face, for the woman laughed as she swung down from her horse with practiced ease. "Yes, I'm actually a doctor, trained at the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. I assure you, I'm fully qualified despite my gender." "I didn't mean to appear doubtful," Tessa hurried to explain, extending her hand. "I'm just surprised to find a female physician in such a remote location." "Precisely why I'm here," Dr. Reed replied, shaking Tessa's hand firmly. "Women in towns like Snowflake need proper medical care, especially for matters unique to our sex. The male doctors out here are well-meaning but woefully inadequate when it comes to childbirth and women's conditions." Jackson cleared his throat. "I asked Dr. Reed to ride out and check on you, given your condition. She has a practice in town, but she makes house calls when needed." "I don't recall agreeing to be examined," Tessa said, a touch of frost in her voice. Dr. Reed's eyebrows rose slightly. "No offense intended, Miss Davis. Jackson mentioned you traveled a great distance alone while pregnant. I simply wanted to ensure both you and the baby are well." Tessa softened, recognizing the genuine concern. "I apologize for my sharpness. I've grown perhaps overly defensive these last months." "Understandable, Doctor," Reed said with a nod. "Now, shall we go inside where we can speak privately?" Jackson took both horses' reins. "I'll just see to the animals." Inside, Dr. Reed's examination was thorough but gentle. She asked pointed questions about Tessa's health history, the pregnancy thus far, and her plans for the birth. "The baby seems healthy and is positioned properly," she said when finished. "You're in good health yourself, though I'd like you to gain a bit more weight before delivery." Eat plenty of meat and eggs when you can. And you must promise to send for me when your time comes. Jackson can ride for me day or night. Thank you, Doctor. I will. Dr. Reed began packing her instruments into a leather bag. Jackson mentioned his proposal to you. Tessa stiffened. He had no right to share such a private matter. He needed medical advice regarding the child's welfare, and yours. The doctor snapped her bag closed and fixed Tessa with a direct gaze. I've known Jackson Steele for 8 years. He's a good man, honorable to a fault. His first wife, Caroline, was my dear friend. I have no intention of replacing her, Tessa said quickly. No one's asking you to. Dr. Reed's expression softened. Caroline died of pneumonia 5 years ago. Jackson hasn't so much as looked at another woman since. This proposal of his isn't born of attraction or loneliness. It's simply his nature to protect those in need. Which is precisely why I hesitate to accept, Tessa admitted. I don't want to be someone's charity case. Charity and mutual benefit aren't the same thing, Dr. Reed pointed out. Jackson needs someone to help run this place, to create a proper home again. You need security and respectability. It's a fair exchange. And what of love, affection? The things that should form the foundation of a marriage, Dr. Reed regarded her thoughtfully. Those can grow in time with the right soil. Or they might not. But ask yourself this: what's more important for your child? A father who married its mother for love, or one who chose to give it a name and protection out of decency and respect? The question lingered with Tessa long after Dr. Reed had departed. She prepared supper that evening with unusual care, roasting a chicken with herbs from the garden and baking an apple pie with fruit from the tree behind the house. When Jackson returned from the barn, freshly washed and in a clean shirt, his eyebrows rose at the sight of the table set with the good dishes she'd found in a cabinet. "Special occasion?" he asked, taking his seat. "I thought we might talk," Tessa replied, serving him a generous portion of chicken. "About your proposal." He nodded slowly, watching her as she took her own seat. "I'm listening." "If I were to accept," she began carefully, "I would have conditions." A hint of amusement touched his eyes. "I expected nothing less. First, I would continue my duties as housekeeper. I won't be idle simply because I become your wife in name." "Agreed, though you'll take proper rest before and after the birth." Tessa nodded. "Second, I would want to understand the financial arrangement." "I assume we would maintain separate finances." Jackson shook his head. "That wouldn't be realistic if we're presenting ourselves as a true married couple. I propose joint ownership of what we acquire going forward, with you having your own allowance to spend as you see fit." It was more generous than she'd expected. "Third, regarding the baby, you said it would have your name, but what exactly does that mean in terms of your relationship to the child?" Jackson set down his fork and looked at her directly. "If I give a child my name, Miss Davis, it becomes my child in every way that matters. I would raise it as my own, provide for its education and future, and treat it with all the care and responsibility a father should." Something in his tone, the certainty, the quiet conviction, made Tessa's throat tighten unexpectedly. "And if the arrangement between us doesn't work out, marriage is for life as far as I'm concerned. But if you found the situation unbearable, I wouldn't keep you against your will." The child, however, would remain a Steele. It was the answer she'd feared. "You would separate me from my baby." "No," he said firmly. "I would hope you would both remain, but if you chose to leave, you would not go empty-handed, and you would always have a place here as the child's mother." "I simply meant I wouldn't relinquish my responsibility to the child, ever." Relief flooded through her. "I understand. There's one more condition." "Which is?" Tessa took a deep breath. "I need to know about your late wife." Not because I'm trying to replace her, but because her memory clearly lives in this house. If I'm to live here, even in a marriage of convenience, I need to understand what came before. Pain flashed across Jackson's face, so brief she almost missed it. For a moment she thought he would refuse. Then he pushed his plate aside and folded his hands on the table. Caroline was from Philadelphia originally. Came west with her father, who was surveying land for the railroad. We met in Prescott at a harvest dance. She was beautiful, educated, completely unsuited for ranch life, but determined to try it anyway. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. We had 3 good years together before the pneumonia took her. No children, though we'd hoped for them. I'm sorry for your loss, Tessa said softly. It was a long time ago. He straightened in his chair. Does that satisfy your curiosity? It helps me understand. She hesitated. I have one last question, and I need complete honesty. Why are you really doing this? The truth, please. Jackson was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. My mother was abandoned by my father before I was born. She struggled my entire childhood, working herself to illness trying to provide for me, enduring the whispers and judgment of so-called decent folk. When she died, I was 14, alone in the world. His blue eyes held hers steadily. No child should bear the burden of their parents' choices. And no woman should have to face the world's cruelty alone, because a man lacked honor. In that moment, Tessa saw him clearly, not just the stern, solitary rancher, but the boy who'd lost everything, the man shaped by early hardship into someone for whom duty and honor weren't just words but a code to live by. I accept your proposal, she said quietly. When shall we marry? The wedding took place 3 days later in Judge Parker's office in town. Tessa wore her blue dress, freshly laundered and pressed, with wildflowers Jackson had picked that morning arranged in her hair. Dr. Reed stood as witness, along with Henry Wilson from the general store. The ceremony was brief, the words ancient and solemn. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson hesitated for just a moment before leaning down to place a chaste kiss on Tessa's cheek. His beard tickled her skin, and she caught the scent of soap and pine. It was her first experience of physical contact with him beyond a handshake, and she found herself unexpectedly flustered by the simple gesture. "Mrs. Steele," he said formally, offering his arm. "Mr. Steele," she replied, taking it. They walked out into the bright Arizona sunshine as husband and wife, an arrangement founded on practicality rather than passion, yet somehow feeling more substantial than Tessa had anticipated. The townspeople who witnessed their exit from the judge's office reacted with predictable curiosity and surprise. Tessa heard the whispers, saw the glances at her midsection, but found herself standing straighter with Jackson's solid presence beside her. Let them talk. She was Tessa Steele now, wife of a respected rancher, not a desperate unwed mother-to-be. Dr. Reed hosted a small reception at her home, where a handful of Jackson's acquaintances offered awkward but sincere congratulations. The story they'd agreed upon was simple. They had met during Tessa's previous visit to Arizona some months earlier, corresponded since, and married quickly upon her return due to her condition. It wasn't entirely believable, perhaps, but provided just enough social cover to quiet the worst of the gossip. The journey back to the ranch that afternoon felt different. Tessa sat beside Jackson in his wagon, her small collection of belongings in the back, watching the landscape roll by with new eyes. This was her home now, these rugged hills and valleys, this vast expanse of sky. This taciturn man beside her was her husband. "You're quiet," Jackson observed as they neared the ranch. Just thinking about how much has changed in so short a time, she admitted. A week ago, I stepped off the stagecoach with no prospects and little hope. Now I'm a married woman with a home. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Regrets? No, she said honestly. Apprehension, perhaps, about what comes next, but not regret. When they arrived at the ranch house, Jackson surprised her by coming around to her side of the wagon and lifting her down with strong hands at her waist. It was a courtesy she hadn't expected, a small acknowledgment of her new status perhaps. "Welcome home, Mrs. Steele," he said simply. That evening brought another surprise. After supper, Jackson disappeared into the barn and returned carrying a large wooden cradle, beautifully crafted with intricate carvings along the sides. "I made this," he explained, setting it down in the sitting room. "Thought the baby would need a proper place to sleep." Tessa ran her fingers over the smooth wood, touched beyond measure by the gesture. "It's beautiful, Jackson. When did you have time? Been working on it evenings since you arrived." He looked almost embarrassed by her evident emotion. "It's practical is all. Baby needs a cradle." But it was more than practical, and they both knew it. It was his first tangible commitment to the child, a physical manifestation of his promise to be its father. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once, awkwardly, then retreated to his study as he did most evenings. Tessa remained by the cradle, rocking it gently and imagining the tiny life that would soon fill it. For the first time since learning of her pregnancy, the future didn't seem quite so terrifying. The following weeks brought gradual changes to life at the Double S Ranch. True to her word, Tessa continued her duties as housekeeper, though Jackson insisted she take frequent rest periods as her pregnancy advanced. The house transformed under her care. Curtains appeared at windows that had been bare for years. Flowers graced the dining table, and the subtle feminine touches that had been absent since Caroline's death returned. Jackson remained reserved but unfailingly considerate. He made a point of taking meals with her, making conversation despite his natural inclination toward silence. He brought home books from town when he learned of her fondness for reading, and once, memorably, returned from a cattle sale in Prescott with a rocking chair for the bedroom. She now occupied formerly a guest room more suited to her status as his wife than the housekeeper's quarters off the kitchen. They existed in a curious limbo, more than employer and employee, less than true husband and wife. Tessa found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, noting the way his stern expression softened when he spoke to his horses, the care he took to clean his boots before entering the house, the unexpected gentleness of his hands when he helped her down from the wagon on their weekly trips to town. October brought cooler weather and the preparations for winter. Jackson and the hands worked long days cutting and stacking firewood, making repairs to the barn and outbuildings, and bringing the cattle down from the higher pastures. Tessa preserved the last of the garden harvest, putting up jars of vegetables and fruits for the months ahead, and began sewing small garments for the baby that would arrive with the first snows. It was during one such evening of sewing that a sudden, sharp pain gripped her abdomen. She gasped, dropping the tiny nightgown she'd been hemming. "Tessa," Jackson looked up from his account books at the desk across the sitting room. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she said automatically, then winced as another pain came. "Just the baby moving strongly." He frowned, rising from his chair. "You're pale as milk. That's not just movement." Before she could protest, he was kneeling beside her chair, his hand hovering uncertainly near her belly. "May I?" Startled by the request, she nodded. His large, work-roughened hand rested gently on her stomach just as another pain hit. His eyes widened. "That's not right. You're not due for weeks yet." "False pains," Tessa insisted, though fear had begun to creep in. Dr. Reed mentioned they can happen. Jackson wasn't convinced. I'm riding for the doctor. In the dark, it's nearly 9 o'clock. Then she'll be easy to find at home instead of out on calls. He was already moving toward the door. I'll be back as quick as I can. Lie down and rest until then. Before Tessa could argue further, he was gone. She heard him in the barn, speaking urgently to his horse, and then the pound of hoofbeats fading into the night. The intensity of his concern both touched and frightened her. If he was that worried, perhaps these weren't false pains after all. Alone in the quiet house, Tessa tried to remain calm. The pains were irregular and relatively mild, surely not labor. But as the clock ticked past 10, then 11, they grew stronger and more frequent. Fear took hold in earnest. It was too early. The baby wasn't due until late November at the earliest. By the time she heard horses approaching, Tessa was curled on her side on the sofa, breathing through contractions that came every few minutes. The door burst open, and Jackson strode in with Dr. Reed close behind. How long between pains? The doctor asked, already removing her coat and rolling up her sleeves. 4 minutes, maybe less, Tessa gasped. Dr. Reed's expression grew serious. Jackson, I need hot water, clean towels, and sheets. Tessa, let's get you to bed. The next hours passed in a blur of pain and fear. Dr. Reed's calm, capable presence was the only constant as Tessa's body worked to bring her child into the world far earlier than nature had intended. Jackson remained outside the bedroom door, his pacing audible during the brief lulls between contractions. Push now, Tessa, Dr. Reed urged as dawn approached. The baby's coming, ready or not. With one final, tremendous effort, Tessa felt her child slip into the world, impossibly small and terrifyingly silent. It's a boy, Dr. Reed announced, working quickly over the tiny form. A small but perfect boy. Why isn't he crying? Tessa demanded, panic rising. What's wrong with him? Long, agonizing seconds passed before a thin, reedy wail filled the room. Tessa collapsed back against the pillows, tears of relief streaming down her face. Dr. Reed wrapped the tiny infant in a blanket and placed him on Tessa's chest. He'll need special care, the doctor warned. He's early and small for it. Keep him warm, feed him often, even waking him if necessary. The next few weeks will be critical. Tessa barely heard her, transfixed by the impossibly small face peering up at her from the blanket. Dark hair, a tiny nose, perfectly formed lips. He was beautiful despite his early arrival. Jackson, Dr. Reed called toward the door. You can come in now. The door opened slowly. Jackson stood hesitantly at the threshold, his face drawn with worry and exhaustion. When his gaze fell on the bundle in Tessa's arms, something shifted in his expression. A boy, Tessa said softly. Your son. Jackson moved to the bedside, lowering himself carefully to sit on its edge. He stared at the infant with an expression of wonder and fear so naked that Tessa felt like an intruder witnessing it. He's so small, he whispered. But strong, Dr. Reed assured him. He's breathing well, which is the most important thing for a premature baby. Jackson extended one finger tentatively, brushing it against the baby's cheek. The infant turned toward the touch, his tiny mouth working. He needs a name, Tessa said. Jackson looked at her, then back at the child. What did you have in mind? She hadn't thought that far ahead, focused as she'd been on simply surviving until the birth. Now, looking at this tiny person who had arrived so determinedly ahead of schedule, she found herself saying, William, after my father. Jackson's expression clouded momentarily. The man who abandoned your mother? No, Tessa corrected, realizing the confusion. William Davis was my father, not this baby's. He died when I was 12. He was a good man. The tension left Jackson's shoulders. William Steele, he said, testing the name. It's a good name, strong. William Jackson Steele, Tessa amended. After both his fathers, the one who gave him life and the one who gave him a name. Something flickered in Jackson's eyes, surprise and perhaps something deeper. You don't need to do that. I want to, Tessa insisted. You've done more for him already than his natural father ever would have. Dr. Reed, who had been quietly cleaning up, cleared her throat. I'll leave you three alone for a bit. I've left instructions for Tessa's care and the babies on the kitchen table. Jackson, I expect you to see they're followed to the letter. After she departed, a strange silence fell over the bedroom. Tessa, exhausted beyond measure but unable to tear her gaze from her son's face, was acutely aware of Jackson's continued presence at the edge of the bed. He seemed reluctant to leave but unsure of his place in this new reality. Would you like to hold him? She offered impulsively. Jackson looked startled. I've never held a baby before, especially not one so small. There's nothing to it, just support his head. She demonstrated, then carefully transferred the tiny bundle to Jackson's massive hands. The contrast was striking, the large, weathered cowboy cradling the impossibly fragile newborn. Jackson held perfectly still, as if afraid the slightest movement might shatter the child. But after a moment his posture softened and he brought the baby closer to his chest. Hello, William Jackson, he said quietly. Welcome to the Double S, it's your home now. In that moment, watching her husband, for that's what he truly became in her mind, then bond with her son, Tessa felt something shift in her heart. This arrangement of convenience suddenly seemed like much more than a practical solution to her predicament. It felt like the beginning of something she hadn't dared to hope for, a family. The early days with William were a blur of exhaustion, fear, and unexpected moments of pure joy. True to Dr. Reed's warning, his premature arrival brought challenges he struggled to nurse, slept too deeply, and needed constant monitoring to ensure he stayed warm enough. Tessa barely left the bedroom those first days, dozing in brief snatches between William's feedings. Jackson surprised her with his involvement. Despite his initial awkwardness with the infant, he quickly developed a routine of checking on them both throughout the day, bringing meals to Tessa's bedside, and sitting with William against his chest in the evenings, keeping the baby warm while Tessa bathed or simply took a few moments for herself. You don't have to do all this, she told him on the fifth night, finding him in the rocking chair beside the fire, William sleeping peacefully against his shoulder. I know, he replied simply. Most men wouldn't bother. Jackson looked up at her, his blue eyes serious in the firelight. I'm not most men, and he's my son now. The simplicity of the statement, the quiet certainty behind it, touched something deep within her. This man who had married her out of duty was exceeding every expectation, transforming a practical arrangement into something that felt increasingly like a real marriage in every way except one. As November progressed, William gained strength and weight, his cheeks filling out, his cry growing more robust. Dr. Reed, who visited weekly to check on his progress, pronounced herself satisfied with his development. You've done well, both of you, she told them during her third visit. He's thriving despite his early arrival, and Tessa, you're looking much better yourself. It was true. The exhaustion of new motherhood notwithstanding, Tessa felt stronger than she had in months. The security of having a home, a supportive husband even if in name only, and the joy of watching her son grow healthier by the day had restored something in her that had been broken long before she arrived in Snowflake. With William's improving health, Tessa gradually resumed some of her household duties. Jackson had hired a local girl, Annie Weaver, to help with cleaning and laundry during her confinement, but Tessa missed the rhythm of running the household. She began by taking over the cooking again, finding satisfaction in preparing meals for Jackson and occasionally the hands. One evening in early December, as the first serious snow of the season fell outside, Tessa put William down in his cradle and joined Jackson at the dining table for supper. She'd made his favorite beef stew with dumplings, and they ate in companionable silence for a while. "I received a letter today," Jackson said eventually, "from my sister in Denver." Tessa looked up in surprise. "I didn't know you had a sister, Rebecca. She's 5 years younger than me." "Married a banker, has 3 children now." He hesitated. "I wrote to her about our marriage and William's birth." "Oh." Tessa tried to keep her voice neutral, though she felt a flash of anxiety. "What did she say?" "She wants to visit in the spring, meet you and William." He studied Tessa's expression. "That is, if you're comfortable with it." The consideration touched her. "Of course. She's family now." Jackson nodded, looking relieved. "There's something else I've been meaning to discuss with you about William's future." "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing like that. I just—" He set down his fork, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I'd like to make it official. Legally adopt him, I mean, so there's never any question about his place here or his rights to inherit the ranch someday." Tessa's throat tightened with emotion. "You would do that, if you're agreeable. It wouldn't change anything day to day. Just make sure his future is secure, no matter what happens." "What about your family? Would they accept a child not of your blood as your heir?" Jackson's expression hardened slightly. "William is my son in every way that matters. Anyone who says differently won't be welcome at the Double S." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Tessa's heart beat faster. "Then yes, I would be honored if you adopted him legally." Relief and something like happiness crossed Jackson's face. "Good. I'll speak to Judge Parker next time we're in town." After dinner, they sat together in the sitting room as had become their custom, Tessa with her mending, Jackson reading the newspaper from Prescott that arrived weekly. The domesticity of the scene struck Tessa suddenly. In just a few months, they had developed the rhythms and routines of a long married couple, comfortable in each other's presence without the need for constant conversation. When William began fussing in his cradle, Jackson rose before Tessa could set aside her sewing. "I'll get him." She watched as he lifted the baby with practiced ease now, settling him against his shoulder and pacing slowly around the room. William immediately quieted, apparently soothed by the gentle motion and the rumble of Jackson's voice as he spoke softly to the infant. "What are you telling him?" Tessa asked, curious. Jackson looked almost embarrassed. "Just about the ranch. What we'll teach him when he's older, riding, roping, how to read the weather, things a boy should know." "And will I have any say in his education?" she teased gently. "Of course. You'll teach him all the things I can't: reading, figures, proper manners." His expression grew serious. "I want him to have more opportunities than I did. Schooling, maybe even college someday if he wants it." "You're planning far ahead," Tessa observed. "A father should." He continued his slow circuit of the room, William now sleeping peacefully against his chest. "Father." The word settled over them both. Jackson Steele had become a father in every meaningful sense, not through blood but through choice, daily, deliberate choice. Watching him with her son, Tessa realized with sudden clarity that her feelings for this man had evolved far beyond gratitude or respect. When had it happened? She couldn't pinpoint the moment, but the truth was undeniable. She was falling in love with her husband. The realization should have been welcome, but instead it filled her with a quiet dread. Their arrangement was built on practical considerations, not affection. Jackson had made it clear from the beginning that he wasn't seeking a romantic attachment. If he knew of her growing feelings, would it change things between them? Would it make him uncomfortable in his own home? "Tessa, you've gone very quiet." She forced a smile. "Just tired. It's been a long day. Here." He crossed to her chair and gently transferred the sleeping William to her arms. "You should rest. I'll bank the fire before I turn in." His hand brushed against hers in the exchange, a brief, incidental touch that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through her. She stood quickly, needing distance before her face betrayed her thoughts. "Good night, Jackson, and thank you for everything you've said tonight. About William," he nodded, his expression softening in that way it did only when he looked at her or the baby. "Good night, Tessa." In her bedroom, after settling William in his cradle, Tessa stood at the window watching the snow fall in the moonlight. Her situation had transformed so completely from desperation to security, from loneliness to family. Should she not be content with that? Was it greedy to want love from a man who had already given her so much? She resolved to guard her heart more carefully, to be satisfied with the arrangement as it stood. Better that than risk the foundation of security she and William now had. But resolutions made in the quiet of night often prove difficult to keep in the light of day. As December gave way to January of 1884, and William grew stronger and more alert by the day, Tessa found herself increasingly aware of Jackson's presence, the sound of his footsteps coming in from the barn, the deep timbre of his voice when he spoke to the hands, the rare but transformative sight of his smile when William grasped his finger or made a new sound. The winter brought them all closer by necessity. Heavy snows limited travel to town, and the shortened days meant more evenings spent together by the fire. Jackson taught Tessa to play checkers, and she surprised him with her quick grasp of strategy. She read aloud from books he'd never had time for, Dickens and Twain, and occasionally poetry, which he claimed not to enjoy but listened to with rapt attention nonetheless. It was during one such evening in late January that the fragile balance of their relationship shifted again. William, now nearly 3 months old and thriving, had been unusually fussy all day. By evening he was inconsolable, his wails echoing through the house despite all Tessa's efforts to soothe him. "Let me try," Jackson offered after Tessa had been pacing with the screaming infant for nearly an hour. "You look exhausted." Too tired to argue, she handed William over. To her surprise, Jackson didn't simply hold him but began to sing a low, somewhat off-key rendition of a cowboy lullaby she'd never heard before. His deep voice rumbled through the quiet house, the simple melody rising and falling as he moved around the room with William against his shoulder. Gradually, miraculously, the baby's cries diminished to whimpers, then ceased altogether. Within minutes, he was sound asleep. "How did you do that?" Tessa asked in wonder. Jackson looked almost sheepish. "My mother used to sing that to me, said it was the only thing that would quiet me when I was teething." He glanced down at William, thought it might be the same for him. His gums looked swollen earlier. Teething already. Tessa moved closer, gently opening William's mouth to check. Sure enough, there was a slight swelling where his first tooth would eventually appear. Poor little man. No wonder he was so unhappy. They stood close together, both looking down at the sleeping baby, their heads nearly touching. The intimacy of the moment, 3 people who by all appearances formed a family, made Tessa acutely aware of the man beside her. The scent of him, soap and leather, and something uniquely Jackson, the warmth radiating from his body, the gentle way he held her son. "You're a natural father," she said softly. "Never thought I would be." His voice was equally quiet. "After Caroline died, I figured that part of life was over for me." It was the first time he'd mentioned his late wife without prompting since their wedding day. Tessa treaded carefully. "You must have wanted children with her. We both did." His gaze remained on William. "It didn't happen. The doctor in Prescott thought maybe she couldn't carry a child. It was hard on her. I'm sorry." "She would have liked you," Jackson said unexpectedly. "Caroline, I mean." She was like you in some ways, determined, brave. She'd approve of you raising a child in her home." The words were clearly meant as a compliment, but they stung nonetheless. Was that how Jackson saw her, as a caretaker for Caroline's home, a mother for the children Caroline couldn't have? A practical solution to the emptiness left behind. "I should put him to bed," Tessa said, reaching for William, "before he wakes again." Jackson transferred the baby carefully, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Tessa." "Yes." He seemed about to say something important, his blue eyes searching her face in the firelight. Then he shook his head slightly. "Nothing. Good night." Confused and oddly disappointed, Tessa retreated to her bedroom with William. Whatever Jackson had been about to say remained unspoken, hanging in the air between them like the snow suspended in the winter night outside. February arrived with a bitter cold snap that kept everyone close to home. The ranch hands stayed in the bunkhouse except for essential chores, and Jackson spent more time than usual in the house, catching up on accounts and correspondence, or working on repairs to tack and tools in the warmth of the kitchen while Tessa baked or prepared meals. These quiet days brought a new level of companionship between them. Without the distractions of ranch work or visitors, they talked more about books, about Jackson's plans for the spring cattle drive, about Tessa's childhood in Boston, about William's rapid development. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, each occupied with their own tasks but aware of the other's presence. In these moments, Tessa could almost forget that theirs was a marriage of convenience. It felt real, the shared home, the daily routines, the joint care of William. Only the separate bedrooms and the careful physical distance Jackson maintained reminded her of the true nature of their arrangement. Until the night of the blizzard. It began innocuously, enough snow falling steadily throughout the day, nothing unusual for February in the high country. But as evening approached, the wind picked up, howling around the corners of the house and driving the snow into drifts against the walls. "This is turning nasty," Jackson observed, returning from a final check on the livestock. He stamped snow from his boots in the mudroom and hung his heavy coat on its peg. "Barometers dropping fast, might be in for a real blow." "Will the animals be all right?" Tessa asked, concerned. "They're sheltered in the barn with plenty of hay." "The hands will take turns checking on them through the night." He moved to the fireplace, adding another log to the already substantial blaze. "We should keep the fires built up. Temperature's going to drop like a stone once full dark hits." By bedtime, the storm had developed into a full-fledged blizzard. Wind shrieked around the house, finding every crack and crevice, while snow piled against the windows until they were nearly covered. Despite the roaring fires in the main rooms, drafts made the lamp flames flicker and sent chills through the house. Tessa put William to bed in his cradle, which they had moved into the sitting room near the largest fireplace. She added an extra blanket and tucked hot bricks wrapped in flannel near his feet, concerned about the cold that seemed to be seeping into the house despite their precautions. "He'll be warmer in here than in your bedroom," Jackson said, watching her fuss over the baby. "The fire will keep it comfortable all night. What about you? Your room gets the worst of the north wind," he shrugged. "I've slept in colder. I'll be fine." But at midnight, Tessa woke to William's cries and found the sitting room temperature had dropped precipitously despite the fire. The blizzard had intensified, wind now howling with an almost human voice, rattling the windows in their frames. She lifted William from his cradle, alarmed at how cold his hands and feet felt despite the blankets. Holding him close to share her body heat, she added wood to the fire and looked around for additional blankets. "Everything all right?" Jackson appeared in the doorway, hair mussed from sleep, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders over his long underwear. Even in her concern for William, Tessa couldn't help noticing the powerful breadth of his chest and shoulders, usually hidden beneath layers of clothing. "The fire died down more than I expected," she explained, shifting William to her other arm. "He's cold." Jackson frowned, crossing to them and touching William's cheek with the back of his hand. "Too cold. This room isn't holding heat with the wind coming from this direction." As if to emphasize his point, a particularly violent gust rattled the windows and sent a shower of ash back into the room from the fireplace. "My bedroom is on the sheltered side of the house," Jackson said after a moment's consideration. "It's smaller and easier to heat. You and William should move in there for tonight. Where will you sleep? I'll take the sofa in here, keep the fire going." "Don't be ridiculous," Tessa said, surprising herself with her boldness. "You'd freeze out here and your back would never recover from that sofa. Your bed is large enough for both of us and William can sleep between us." Jackson looked startled, then uncertain. "Tessa, I promised you separate rooms. I don't want to make you uncomfortable." "What would make me uncomfortable is knowing you're suffering needlessly when there's a practical solution available. We're adults, Jackson. We can share a bed for one night without impropriety." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Bring William. I'll add wood to the stove in my room." Jackson's bedroom was indeed warmer, the small iron stove in the corner already radiating heat. The room was simply furnished a large bed with a patchwork quilt, a chest of drawers, a chair by the window, and a small bedside table with a lamp and a book. It was undeniably masculine in its spareness, but neat and clean. Tessa hesitated at the threshold, suddenly aware of the intimacy of entering her husband's private space. This was where he slept, where he dressed, where he existed in the moments when he wasn't Jackson Steele, rancher and provider, but simply Jackson, the man. "Come in before you let all the warm air out," he said, stirring the stove. "The bed's ready." She moved to the side of the bed farthest from the door, gently placing William in the center before climbing in herself, still fully dressed in her nightgown and robe. Jackson extinguished the lamp and joined them, staying carefully on his edge of the mattress with William forming a natural barrier between them. In the dim light from the stove, Tessa could just make out his profile as he settled on his back, staring at the ceiling. The wind continued to howl outside, but in here it was warm and still, the only sound William's soft breathing between them. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for taking care of us." Jackson turned his head to look at her across the sleeping baby. "You're my family now, both of you. I'll always take care of you." The simple declaration, spoken in the intimate darkness of his bedroom, made Tessa's heart constrict. Family. He had claimed them not just out of duty or obligation, but as his own. "Jackson," she began, not entirely sure what she meant to say, but needing to respond to the emotion behind his words. "Sleep," he interrupted gently. "You're exhausted. We can talk in the morning." She wanted to protest, to seize this moment of connection, but her eyelids were indeed heavy with fatigue. The warmth of the room and the security of Jackson's presence beside her conspired to pull her toward sleep. "Good night," she murmured, surrendering to exhaustion. "Good night, Tessa," came the low reply, the last thing she heard before drifting off. When she woke, pale morning light was filtering through the frost-covered window. William remained asleep between them, but Jackson was already awake, watching them both with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Morning," she said softly, feeling suddenly self-conscious in the light of day. "Morning." His voice was rough with sleep. "Storms died down. We got about 3 feet of snow from the looks of it. That much. We'll be housebound for days, probably." He sat up carefully, trying not to disturb William. "I should check on the stock. Tessa reached out impulsively, her hand catching his arm before he could rise. Jackson, wait. About last night. He went very still, his eyes meeting hers. What about it? What you said about us being your family, did you mean it? I don't say things I don't mean. His gaze was steady, unwavering. But this arrangement between us, it started as a practical solution. A way to provide security for William and me. It did, he acknowledged. Does that matter now, did it? Tessa wasn't sure. All she knew was that somewhere in the months they'd lived as husband and wife, the lines between duty and desire, between arrangement and affection, had blurred beyond recognition. I think it might, she said finally, because I'm not sure either of us is pretending anymore. A flicker of something, hope perhaps, or uncertainty crossed his face. What are you saying, Tessa? Before she could answer, William stirred between them, his face scrunching as he prepared to demand his breakfast. The moment broken, Jackson rose from the bed. We'll continue this later, he promised, reaching for his clothes. After I've seen to the animals. But later proved elusive. The aftermath of the blizzard created endless work paths to shovel, animals to tend, a section of barn roof damaged by wind that required immediate repair. By the time Jackson returned to the house in the late afternoon, he was exhausted and preoccupied with the list of tasks still ahead. Tessa, meanwhile, had her own concerns. The storm had lasted long enough to deplete their pantry more than she'd realized, and with the roads likely impassable for days, she needed to carefully ration their remaining supplies. She spent the day taking inventory and planning meals that would stretch their provisions as far as possible. They passed like ships in the night, sharing space, but not truly connecting, each absorbed in their respective responsibilities. The conversation begun that morning remained unfinished, the possibility it had raised left dangling between them. Days passed in similar fashion as they dug out from the storm. When the road to town was finally cleared enough for travel, Jackson immediately rode in for supplies and to check on neighbors. Tessa threw herself into cleaning the house and caring for William, who was becoming more active and alert by the day. It wasn't until nearly 2 weeks after the blizzard that they found themselves alone together in the sitting room after William had been put to bed. Jackson had just returned from a late check on the stock, and Tessa was darning socks by the fire. "You've been avoiding me," she said without preamble as he hung his hat on its peg. He paused, then turned to face her. "Not avoiding, just busy. We haven't finished our conversation from that morning after the storm." Jackson ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. "Wasn't sure you wanted to. I do." Tessa set aside her darning and stood. "I need to know where we stand, Jackson. What this marriage truly is." He crossed to the fireplace, staring into the flames for a long moment before speaking. "What do you want it to be? That's not an answer. Maybe I need to know what you want before I can give you one." He turned to face her, his expression guarded yet somehow vulnerable. "I made you promises when we married: security, respect, a home for you and William. I've kept those promises." "You have," Tessa agreed. "More than kept them. You've been generous and kind beyond anything I could have expected." "But," she took a deep breath, gathering her courage, "but I find myself wanting more than security and respect, and I need to know if that's something you're willing or able to give." Jackson went very still, his blue eyes intent on her face. "What exactly are you asking for, Tessa?" "A real marriage," she said simply. "In every sense." The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Tessa's heart pounded as she waited for his response, fear and hope warring within her. Had she misread him completely? Would her admission change everything between them, and not for the better? When Jackson finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. When I proposed this arrangement, I told you it would be a marriage in name only, that I wasn't expecting that part of marriage. I meant to keep my word." Disappointment flooded through her, sharp and painful. "I understand. I shouldn't have let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I meant to keep my word because I thought that's what you wanted, a practical arrangement without complications. I never expected to feel the way I do now." Hope flickered back to life. "And how is that?" Instead of answering directly, Jackson closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. His hands came up to frame her face, surprisingly gentle for their size and strength. For a heartbeat, he simply looked at her, his eyes searching hers as if seeking permission or reassurance. Then he kissed her. It was tentative at first, almost questioning, but when Tessa responded, sliding her arms around his neck, Jackson deepened the kiss with a hunger that matched her own. His beard was soft against her skin, his body warm and solid as she pressed against him. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "Does that answer your question?" he asked, his voice rough. Tessa smiled, joy bubbling up within her like a spring. "I think I need a bit more clarification." A slow smile spread across his face, not the quick, fleeting thing she occasionally glimpsed, but a full, genuine expression of happiness that transformed his features. "Mrs. Steele, are you flirting with me?" "Mr. Steele, I believe I am." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingers. "And I'm hoping my husband might take me to bed properly, as he's never done before." Jackson's eyes darkened at her words. "Are you certain? There's no hurry. We could take our time, court properly as we never did." "We've lived as husband and wife for months, Jackson. We're raising a child together. I'd say we're well past the courting stage." She stood on tiptoe to press a kiss to the corner of his mouth. "I want this. I want you." With unexpected grace for a man his size, Jackson swept her into his arms and carried her toward his bedroom, their bedroom now, she supposed. As he laid her gently on the bed they had shared only once before, during the blizzard, Tessa felt a surge of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her to Snowflake, to this man who had offered her security and found love instead. Their coming together was a revelation, tender yet passionate, unhurried yet urgent. Jackson worshipped her body with hands and lips, learning what pleased her with dedicated attention. And when they finally joined, the physical culmination of months of growing affection, Tessa felt as if something long broken within her had finally healed. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms, her head pillowed on his chest, Tessa listened to the steady beat of his heart and knew with absolute certainty that she was home. "I love you," Jackson said quietly into the darkness, his hand stroking her hair. "Have for some time now." "Wasn't sure you felt the same." Tessa raised her head to look at him, though his features were only dimly visible in the moonlight filtering through the window. "How could you not know? I've been half in love with you since you held William that first day." He chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. "We've been a pair of fools, haven't we? Both wanting the same thing and too afraid to speak of it." "Not fools," she corrected, pressing a kiss to his chest. "Just careful. We had William to consider and the stability we'd built." "And now we have everything," Tessa said simply. Spring arrived in fits and starts, bringing with it new life and new beginnings for the Steele family. William, now 6 months old, was sitting up on his own, babbling constantly, and showing every sign of becoming a mobile menace in the near future. The legal adoption had been completed in March, with Judge Parker signing the papers that officially made William Jackson Steele the son and heir of Jackson Steele of the Double S Ranch. April brought Jackson's sister Rebecca and her family for a 2-week visit that transformed the usually quiet ranch house into a whirlwind of activity. Rebecca, A lively woman with her brother's blue eyes and a much readier smile took to Tessa immediately and doted shamelessly on William. "You've done my brother a world of good," she told Tessa one afternoon as they watched Jackson and Rebecca's husband David teaching her oldest son to throw a lariat. "I haven't seen him this happy since before Caroline died." "He's done the same for me," Tessa replied honestly. "I arrived here with nothing but a baby on the way and no prospects. He gave us both a home and a future." Rebecca squeezed her hand. "And you gave him back his heart. Fair exchange, I'd say." The cattle drive in May took Jackson away from home for 3 weeks, the longest separation since their marriage. Tessa managed the ranch in his absence with the help of Caleb and Micah, finding she had a good head for the business side of ranching. When Jackson returned, sun-browned and trail-weary but successful in his sales, he brought news that would change their lives again. "The railroad's coming through Holbrook next year," he announced over dinner the night of his return. "It'll change everything for ranchers in this region. Easier shipping, better prices." "That's wonderful news," Tessa said, though she noted a curious tension in his manner. "Isn't it?" Jackson set down his fork. "It is, and it got me thinking about the future, our future." He reached across the table for her hand. "How would you feel about expanding the Double S? Expanding? You mean buying more land, cattle, maybe breeding some better stock. With the railroad coming, it's the right time to grow. But it would mean more work, more responsibility." Tessa considered this. "You think we're ready for that? I think we're ready for anything together." He squeezed her hand. "There's something else. Dr. Reed mentioned she's looking for someone to help at her clinic a few days a week. Said you might be interested, given your way with people and quick mind." Surprise rendered Tessa momentarily speechless. "Me? Work at the clinic? Only if you wanted to," Jackson added quickly. "The ranch and William come first, of course, but you've mentioned enjoying your volunteer work at the church clinic in Boston." "I did enjoy it," Tessa admitted. "But I never thought I'd have the opportunity to do something similar here." "Why not? William's old enough now that Annie could watch him for a few hours, and you've more than proven your capability managing things here while I was gone." The offer touched her deeply, not just for the opportunity itself, but for what it represented. Jackson saw her as more than just his wife and William's mother. He recognized her abilities and supported her having interests beyond the home. "I'd like to try," she said. "Thank you for thinking of me." "Always." He smiled, that full, genuine smile that still made her heart skip. "Now, there's one more thing I've been wanting to discuss with you. You're full of surprises tonight." Jackson's expression grew serious. "This one's the biggest." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "William's going to be walking soon, talking, growing up fast. I was thinking he might want a brother or sister before too long." Tessa's breath caught. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I'd like us to have another child. One we make together out of the love we've found." He looked suddenly uncertain. "Unless you don't want—" "I do," Tessa interrupted, joy bubbling up within her. "Very much." Relief and happiness spread across Jackson's face. "Well then, Mrs. Steele, perhaps we should retire early this evening. Get started on that project." Tessa laughed, rising from her chair to move around the table and into his waiting arms. "Mr. Steele, that is the best idea you've had all day." Epilogue. June 1888. The Double S Ranch flourished in the years following the arrival of the railroad, just as Jackson had predicted. With careful management and strategic expansion, it grew into one of the most prosperous operations in Arizona Territory. The main house expanded as well, with the addition of several rooms to accommodate the growing Steele family. William, now 5 years old and the spitting image of his adoptive father despite their lack of blood relation, had been joined by 3 siblings. Sarah Elizabeth, born in the summer of 1885. James Thomas, who arrived in the spring of 1887, and baby Rebecca Grace, just 3 months old and already displaying the Steele family determination. Tessa divided her time between managing the household, assisting Dr. Reed at the clinic 2 days a week, and mothering her brood with a joy she had never thought possible in those dark days before her arrival in Snowflake. The town had long since accepted her as Mrs. Steele, the beloved wife of one of their most respected citizens, with few remembering or caring about the circumstances of her arrival. On this particular June evening, with the Arizona sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Tessa stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching Jackson teach William to ride his first real horse, a gentle pony selected specifically for the purpose. Sarah sat on the bottom step, solemnly instructing her rag doll in the proper way to watch her big brother, while James toddled nearby under the watchful eye of Annie Weaver, now a permanent fixture in the household as nanny and housekeeper's assistant. Baby Rebecca slept peacefully in Tessa's arms, untroubled by the excitement. "Look, Mama, I'm riding by myself," William called proudly as Jackson stepped back, allowing the boy to guide the pony in a small circle. "I see you, darling. You're doing wonderfully," Tessa called back, her heart full to bursting with pride and love. Jackson caught her eye across the yard, his smile as warm as the setting sun. After 5 years of marriage, he could still make her breath catch with just a look. Their love had deepened with each passing day, each shared challenge and joy cementing the bond that had begun as a practical arrangement and transformed into something neither could have imagined. As the golden light faded and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Jackson gathered William from his pony and led him toward the house, swinging the boy onto his shoulders for the final steps. "Someone's ready for supper and bed," he announced, setting William down on the porch. "He rode like a true Steele today. Did you see me, Mama? Did you see me riding?" "I saw every moment," Tessa assured him, bending to kiss his flushed cheek. "You made your papa and me very proud. Can I ride again tomorrow?" "Every day until you're as good as your papa," Jackson promised. "Now inside for washing up, all of you. Annie, could you take Rebecca? I need a word with Mrs. Steele." Once the children were herded inside, Jackson joined Tessa at the porch railing, slipping an arm around her waist and drawing her against his side. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," she assured him. "And you, more than I ever thought possible." He turned her to face him, his expression suddenly serious. "You know, there are still days I wake up amazed that you're really here, that all of this isn't some dream I'll wake from to find myself alone again." "Not a dream," Tessa said, reaching up to touch his face, still handsome despite the lines time and weather had added. "And never alone again, not as long as I have breath in my body." "I thank God every day that you stepped off that stagecoach," Jackson murmured. "My pregnant, stubborn, beautiful wife who didn't even know she was mine yet." Tessa smiled at the memory of that day, now distant enough to have lost its sting of fear and desperation. "And I thank God for the cowboy who said my baby would have his name and gave me his heart in the bargain." Inside, they could hear the children laughing, the sounds of their busy, happy household preparing for evening. Out here, in the gathering twilight, Jackson and Tessa Steele held each other close, savoring the moment of quiet connection before rejoining the beautiful chaos of the family they had built together, not from obligation or necessity, but from the enduring love that had transformed them both.